Ukraine's Navy says that 12 more cargo vessels were ready to enter a fledgling Black Sea shipping corridor on their way to Ukrainian ports as Kyiv steps up a push to defy a de facto Russian blockade on its vital sea exports. Russia, which has a much more powerful and bigger naval fleet in the Black Sea, pulled out of a deal in July that had allowed wartime Ukraine to safely ship food products out through what is traditionally its main export corridor. Meanwhile, fighting is continuing on the ground. So for more, let's cross to SABC News correspondent Megumi Lim to give us an update on the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. Megumi, good afternoon. Perhaps you could bring us the latest on your end. We were speaking to some analysts earlier on, and given the dynamics unfolding, there's a possible stalemate that's coming to the fore as we look to a peace process. What can you give us on that front?
Well, there's definitely been more cargo vessels sailing through this temporary corridor, which was established by Ukraine around the beginning of August after Russia backed out of the Black Sea grain deal in July. And it has been quite a successful setting up of this temporary corridor, where the first time they tested out this sea route, it was one vessel sailing through, and the next was again one, and then it increased to 3, and then 5, and then 10. And today the Ukrainian Navy announced that there will be 12 vessels sailing through this new route toward Ukrainian ports. So we are definitely seeing more vessels daring to venture into the Black Sea, although Russia, when it backed out of the grain deal, it said that any civilian ship sailing through the Black Sea towards Ukrainian ports will be seen as a military threat and potentially carrying weapons to Ukraine. But under the Safe Corridor Agreement, these cargo vessels that are headed towards Ukraine have to be carefully inspected in Istanbul before it continues on to the Black Sea. And of course, this involves checking if there are weapons on board as well. And it appears that the series of attacks that were carried out by Ukrainian forces in recent days and weeks against Russia's Black Sea fleet could have really helped this corridor become more viable for these merchant vessels. As we have seen, the Ukrainian forces were able to carry out attacks against the command posts and most recently the headquarters of the Black Sea Fleet. And we have seen Russia move some of its warships away from Sevastopol, which is in Russian-occupied Crimea, towards the port of Novorossiysk, which is farther away from these Ukrainian ports. So we may be seeing more Ukrainian grain being exported to the world market as these vessels begin to use this temporary corridor more and more.
Megumi, thank you for that update. We have also seen the funding debate emerging and the seizing of congressional funding. Perhaps, how is that impacting dynamics in relation to the Ukraine-Russia war as we speak?
Well, of course, there's a lot of uncertainty still surrounding the future of U.S. aid. For example, as we know, U.S. Congress over the weekend passed a last-minute funding bill which didn't include additional aid for Ukraine. But after that, President Joe Biden did convene a call with leaders of G7 countries and NATO, Poland, Romania, and to reassure all Western allies that U.S. remains staunchly supportive of Ukraine. And he expressed confidence that Congress will soon pass legislation which will include continued aid for Ukraine. But of course, the United States is still in a sort of limbo situation as they try to search for someone to replace Kevin McCarthy, who was just ousted from his speakership position. But the Ukrainian ambassador today to the United States said that Ukraine is in close communication with most of the candidates who may be taking over Kevin McCarthy, including Steve Scalise, who is a favored candidate. So although there is some uncertainty, Biden has repeatedly assured allies and also, of course, Ukraine that U.S. aid will not stop and that the United States will continue to support Ukraine for as long as it takes.
Megumi, as we wrap up, we obviously just looking at the impact that this war has had in terms of the humanitarian crisis at large. On the ground, what is the reality? Perhaps children impacted as well. Can you bring us any updates on that front as we're speaking?
Well, of course, life has largely returned to normal in places like central Kyiv, as there has been a sort of bolstering of air defense systems around the government area, around central Kyiv, and people have put a lot of trust in the air defense systems here. So we are seeing a semblance of normalcy here, but of course, we are hearing continued reports of deportation of children from Russian-occupied areas in Ukraine to mainland Russia, to places in Russia, and of course, we also saw reports that these children were taken to places like Belarus. So there is still an ongoing humanitarian crisis, and people are still fleeing Ukraine as the war continues. And of course, places like Kyiv, which was liberated last year, is still undergoing constant shelling by Russian forces from across the Dnipro River. So there are people still dying from constant Russian shelling every day. So of course, there is a lot of obviously soldiers dying near the front lines of the battlefield, but of course regular people living their everyday lives or trying to live their everyday lives in Ukraine are badly affected as the war continues on.